Just one question. I'd like to take advantage of the long experience that Mr. Fugate has had in disaster mitigation and ask for his candid views. And here I'm not asking you about funding. That's not something you control. I want to contrast the difference between the way Congress behaved after the terrorist attack and the way it behaved after Katrina and Sandy. After the terrorist attack, the country, it scared the dickens out of the country. And I must say that it scared us so badly that after the fact, we actually threw money at the jurisdictions. There isn't a state that didn't get funds to prepare for the next disaster attack, including states that al-Qaeda never heard of, never would venture to care about, but every state got some funds. I was on Homeland Security at the time and saw it happen. Again, I'm not asking you about funding. I recognize and appreciate that pre-disaster funding we have over again found in this subcommittee and committee saves us enormously, $4 savings for $1 invested. As we look at Katrina and Sandy, I mean, I recall that in order to get funds for Sandy, even after New York and New Jersey were laid low, it took 2 votes to get funding for you to begin to do your work in Sandy. Now, what I really want to know is, as an agency which has looked at disasters now, terrorists and natural disasters for decades, whether or not the agency needs revisions, whether in law or structure. I mean, can you sit there in the face of Katrina and Sandy and not envision, when you see hurricanes occurring when they're not supposed to occur, when you see climate not only changes but disasters in parts of the country that have never known them? Is the FEMA of today structured decades ago the FEMA that can handle the unknown that we now see before us? And here I'm looking for how the agency, whether it needs to ask for revisions in law or in its own structure, rather than what you encountered after Sandy. And after Sandy, the finger was pointed right at you. It didn't matter whether we gave money or how you were structured, you just had to take it. And instead of just taking it, it does seem to me that the agency with the expertise should come before this panel and tell us whether you are prepared for disaster, for earthquake to occur in California of the kind it has never seen before. Shall we just sit here and think that it will never happen and just wait for it to come after us? Is the FEMA of the 21st century prepared for what we know now from our own experience with Katrina and Sandy? Is surely to come in parts of the country where we never expected. And if so, if you think it's prepared, you should tell us. If it is not fully prepared, I should ask you then, is the agency looking at how it could make recommendations for what appears to be an entirely new era in both terrorist disasters and, for that matter, in now we know natural disasters? Are you looking at the future?
I learned a long time ago, the person that says that we're fully prepared and we know exactly what's going to happen is a fool who will soon be handed.
No, precisely, you don't know what's going to happen.
So we don't.
You know that they have, now I want to make clear,
yeah.
You know that they have hurricanes in Florida. You know that they have earthquakes in California. I bet you didn't know that we would have an earthquake here in the nation's capital. So I'm talking about what you don't know. and what you will be held responsible for, notwithstanding the fact that you don't know. Is your agency structured so it can handle what you don't know?
That's where we're going. What we changed the question was, traditionally, what was FEMA capable of responding to? As you point out, that's a fool's errand, because if you're only prepared to handle a certain level of disaster and something happens you don't expect, you fail. So we went back and started looking at where was the risk in population, and not looking at what FEMA was capable of responding to, but what's the worst case that could happen. And we started asking questions that weren't easy to answer, because the questions started generating response levels greater than the federal government. It forced us to really take a different look at how we fund, as you point out, the Homeland Security dollars. As we fund each jurisdiction, many of which were not likely to have a terrorist attack, but they are also a resource to the rest of the nation when a big disaster happens. We saw this in Sandy, where many responders from outside the area were able to respond because of the capabilities built with those Homeland Security dollars. So we're following what you're pointing out. We cannot prepare for what we expect or what we're prepared to handle. We have to prepare for what could happen. This is driving our strategic planning. This is driving how we're looking at how we're structured FEMA, not to what we can respond to, but what could happen. And that's, again, driving a lot of our decisions. Again, it is, we don't think the resources are necessarily the first answer, but it does require resources and sustained funding. It requires a budget, as you well know. Operating under continuing resolutions is not how you prepare for catastrophic disasters. And in my term here, I've been under more continuing resolutions than I have under budgets. So I would love to have staff, and if necessary, if you are available to sit down and talk about this. But we are definitely trying to look at the future, looking at what could happen, looking at how you build that response. Can I tell you it's built today? No, it's a work in progress. But I think we have moved past the barriers of only planning for what we know or what we're prepared to respond to, and asking a much harder question, how bad it could be. And the President said this in an early meeting that I was attending. He said, we can't protect everything. So we need to know what we can live without and what we can't. And if we can't live without as a nation, that's where we need to really focus. And so when you start looking at disasters and where they could happen and where they're expected versus what could happen based upon the modeling, the data from various organizations and populations at risk, we're looking at how do you build. And it's not just FEMA. You call it whole government, because we've come back to it's going to take local, state, mutual aid. It's going to take the federal government, our Department of Defense. It's going to take our private sector. And it's going to take a lot of the public to respond to that scale of a disaster. And so that's what we're
Chairman, I would just ask that at an appropriate time it would be interesting to have a briefing as to how they're looking at the unknown that we now know to expect but don't know what it is, and could bring calamity to us as Congress would be asked to do what it doesn't have the funds to do or never expected would happen. If they could pinpoint how they go about that, I think it would certainly educate me, and I think it would help the subcommittee and the full committee.
Mr. Chairman, and for the delegate, I think we have some examples we've been doing. We call this catastrophic planning, but some of the work we've done in the new the Cascadian fault zone and subduction zone off the coast of the northwest U.S., the New Madrid earthquake risk, which is, again, a very large risk over large areas. And I think we can show where we're going and tell you what we think is the path to get us there. And then that will give you an opportunity to look at, are there additional tools that you could give us. The last thing I'd like to end with this is the Stafford Act was oftentimes a constraint seen as what FEMA was capable of doing. In the past year since I've been at FEMA, we have responded to Haiti, which is traditionally the role of USAID, but we were asked to support USAID, and we did it. Last year, we were asked to support unaccompanied children and the mass care issues of children in detention facilities, so we supported that. We were asked to support the Ebola response. Many of these things may not be in the papers, but they are capabilities you built, and you gave us the tools under the Homeland Security Act as amended. The Stafford Act, however, is limited to oftentimes only those natural hazards with limited flexibility. I think the delegate brings up an important point. When you look at growing hazards such as cyber and others, what is the role of the disaster relief fund in the consequence world, And if it is not in rebuilding, in the emergency response costs and the ability to use the emergency declaration to mobilize and bring resources to bear, is it worthwhile looking at such things, which it's kind of a question. What is the role in a pandemic? It's not specifically excluded in the emergency declarations, but it's not mentioned. Cyber. Again, we don't look to have the role in the prevention or the law enforcement or even the response to the technical aspects of it. But states and locals will be dealing with consequences of it, many of which will follow similar patterns of other types of hazards. We saw this in Deepwater Horizon. Again, the Coast Guard is the lead agency for that, had many of the tools to do with the response, but much of the coordination with local and state governments had to be built. And again, FEMA is not looking to grow our role, but we think a better understanding of what the intent of Congress is, as you pointed out in the Homeland Security Act as amended, as a principal advisor to the President and to Congress on emergency management, but also our role and capabilities we build for a lot of disasters, not limiting the applicability to other lead federal agencies to support them or governors when they fall outside traditional known disasters.
Chair would recognize Mr. Graves for 5 minutes.